Welcome back to Normal Island. I hope everyone had a great weekend. But it is Monday, so we're going to get stuck in. Joining me tonight, once again, is Helena, aka No Justice MTG. Helena, how was your weekend?
It was wonderful. Great to be back for my first Normal Island of 2025. Hopefully, the first of many. Good to be on the show today.
It is actually a great point. This is your first NI. I've never actually abbreviated by that before. I don't think I will do that again, of 2025. And yes, it will be the first of many. Good stuff. Now, coming up on tonight's show, Mick Lynch retires, gig economy workers have to pay to receive wages, and Labour targets disabled people with cuts. Now, remember to please like and share this show. It really helps with the algorithm. Please keep the comments flowing as we will be reading them about halfway through. And if you can, after the show, if you come back and leave a comment, that actually really helps. Now, on to our first story. Working class hero Mick Lynch has announced his retirement. Lynch is the leader of the trade union RMT, of which they received quite a bit of news coverage over the last 2 years due to their industrial strikes. But it was Lynch who captivated many of us with his no-nonsense media performances, dispatching pundits and Tory MPs with ease. We have a little highlight reel of the mighty Lynch. Let's take a look.
And some would argue that you're actually striking your own way out of a job because you're going to contribute to the railways becoming less popular, less reliable. People are going to stop relying on the railways.
Well, I don't think that's true. That's a government line that you're punting out on their behalf. That's the sort of stuff they come out with.
Excuse me, you don't know. Excuse me, I'm talking to you about conversations I've had. Please, I'm not going to have you stand there and accuse me of being a government mouthpiece. I'm a human being, I'm a middle-aged woman, and I'm a journalist. And I'm talking to you about conversations I've had with people I know. This has got nothing to do with the government.
It's exactly the phraseology that I hear across the table from government ministers, almost verbatim. So there you go. Maybe you're just very in tune with what they say. So what we've got is a return to the railway. We've got... OK, well, fine. Maybe they're in tune with the government as well.
Now, are you or are you not a Marxist? Because if you are a Marxist, then you're into revolution and into bringing down capitalism. So are you or aren't you?
Richard, you do come up with the most remarkable twaddle sometimes, I've got to say.
I didn't say you were a Marxist. I'm saying that you're being accused of being a Marxist, and that's not twaddle. That's called reporting.
No, I'm not. I'm not a Marxist. I'm an elected official of the RMT. I've met every Tory transport minister in the last year. Bus, rail, maritime and the Secretary of State. We've never said we won't meet the Tories. What we said was that they're not at the table. I'm negotiating with the employers. You've also lied that we left negotiations on Saturday and went to a rally. There were no negotiations scheduled for Saturday. You are a liar. We're not special. The whole country is suffering, and we have got a membership and a trade union that is prepared to fight for what we've got. What the rest of the country suffers from is the lack of power, the lack of the ability to organise, and the lack of the wherewithal to take on these employers that are continually driving down wages and making the working class in this country poorer year on year on year. That is just stuff that's written in Conservative Central Office for backbench MPs to spout.
So no
along
sorry
with their
to veterans,
ministers.
Mick. OK, so no sorry to
I
veterans.
don't want this disruption. Fine. I don't want people to be
good to know veterans
inconvenienced, and I want a settlement to this dispute. I can't do that with a backbench MP who's just learned it off a script.
My question to you is, I'm guessing that some of your members will still stay on the picket lines. What will they do if agency workers try to cross those picket lines?
Well, we will picket them. What do you think we'll do? We run a picket line and we'll ask them not to go to work. What is it we do? Do we just accept mass redundancies and our people getting poorer year by year, which is the situation since Cameron and Osborne got elected? Public sector workers have been robbed of wages, whether they're in the military, the police force, the health service, the care service, education. All of those people are getting poorer every year, and it's this government that's responsible for it.
Oh, I love him so much. He's such a hero. But who can forget this absolute classic with Piers Morgan?
What I believe is your Facebook page. I want you to confirm or deny if this is your Facebook page. It's a picture of...
Can you see the
hood from Thunderbirds.
Can you see the likeness?
Well, I'm just wondering where the comparison goes, because he was obviously an evil, criminal, terrorist mastermind, described as the world's most dangerous man who wreaked utter carnage and havoc on the public.
Is that the level you're pitching this at, Piers? That is a joke amongst me and my friends, and you can see the likeness, if you like.
So you're not denying that you are comparing yourself to the Hood?
I'm not comparing myself to anyone. I'm me.
You've literally made your profile picture the Hood. And I'm simply saying, I was a massive...
What? If it was a bunch of flowers,
Thunderbirds fan, and the Hood was the most dangerous, evil person in the world.
He's the most evil puppet made out of vinyl in the world. Is that the level your journalism's at these days?
I simply asked you if that was you and your Facebook page.
Well, do you think I look like the most evil person in the world, Piers?
Well, now you're asking me to answer a difficult question, Mick. I don't know you that well. All I'm saying is you have personally...
I think I am the most evil person in the world. I think I'm a working-class bloke who's leading a trade union in a dispute over jobs, pay and conditions.
I understand. If you don't want to be compared to the Hood, probably better not to have the Hood as your profile picture.
I think it's quite funny.
So do I. But I also like... As I was a Thunderbirds fan...
Is that the level we're at, though? Don't you want to talk about the issues rather than a little vinyl puppet from the 1960s?
I'm simply trying to get inside the mindset of the man about to wreak havoc on the country. It makes me laugh, honestly, that you have the Hood as your profile pic, because that's a man who wreaked havoc on the world.
Well, it makes me laugh that your level of journalism has descended so far that you can't think of any other question rather than a thing about the Thunderbirds.
I didn't put that picture on your profile page.
Yeah, but you've chosen to spend 2 or 3 minutes of this interview talking about an irrelevant.
Because you seem so irritated by the comparison. Well, because you seem so irritated by the comparison to the Hood.
I'm not irritated at all. I'm completely...
You seem very irritated.
Well, I'm not.
You're not? This is your non-irritated face, is it?
What point are you trying to prove, Piers? I mean,
I'm not trying to prove anything. You put it on your Facebook page. I'm simply asking. It's an odd choice for a union boss who's about to go on a series of strikes.
Piers Morgan is the epitome of gutter journalism. Also, when he says union boss, it's elected leader, but the media does a trick there. But I just love how easy he makes it look, and it's not easy. Debating, especially on live TV, it really isn't easy. Helena, what's your reaction to Mick Lynch stepping down from the RMT? I mean, look, I wish him well, but it seems
I just
right.
lost Curtis there.
Are we back? Cog, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, I did. You said my name, and then I lost everything.
Oh, okay. But you can hear me now.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. So I'll start the question again, but basically, I want to get your reaction to Mick Lynch stepping down from the RMT. I wish him well, but it seems right now is the time we need people like him more than ever.
Absolutely. I mean, it is unfortunate that we are going to lose somebody like Mick Lynch from a position, a public position in fighting for working class people, because God knows they've been abandoned by plenty of our politicians, where in a time which the Labour Party specifically, who's supposed to be the representation of the trade union movement in our politics, has decided to step back from a pro-worker position front and centre, because they're trying to move themselves away from the kind of political position that they were holding from 2015 to 2019 to now. Obviously, they had a success at the election going after this very specific group of kind of middle-income people, because that's where they recognise the swing demographic is. That is something that damages the connection between Labour and its heartland communities. It damages the connection between the Labour movement and their heartland communities, especially at a time when trade union membership is at some of its lowest levels ever. We need people like Mick Lynch in the media constantly, every single day, to remind people that the fundamental position that they hold as trade unionists is the last bulwark of defence against the interests of the bourgeois, the interest of the employers. Mick Lynch made that position very clear himself. We want to bargain for our wages and for our futures and for our livelihoods. If you don't bargain, what you're going to have to do is beg, right? Those are your choices between the employer and the employee, where the employee must accept what is foisted upon them by the employer unless they stand together collectively. Otherwise, they would have to beg for pay rises, for proper remuneration, for a fair settlement as the people who do the work and who are productive in society. Now, one of the people who kind of tipped to replace him is potentially Eddie Dempsey. And I think Eddie Dempsey has also done a really good job at standing up for working people in this country. He'd really kind of taken on the mantle that Mick Lynch kind of started during the cost of living crisis, where they were saying that, well, there needs to be a remuneration for working people through the wage packet to rebalance our economy. And the very memorable phrase of his that Eddie Dempsey used was, the people at the top, they're having a disco and it's not on. And that kind of stuff, that kind of messaging, is a thing that's sorely missing from the kind of left-wing political messaging in the country that's been abandoned by the Labour Party. People, the antidote, the political antidote to the kind of like hyper radical Thatcherite individualism of the Reform UK movement. Those kind of people, because I'm looking into the stats on this, Reform UK are tapping into non-voters as much as they are tapping into party switches from elsewhere, because these people have been left behind by mainstream politics. Those are the exact kind of people that can be won over by the kind of rhetoric that Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey espouse by speaking to them sincerely and about the troubles that they feel on a day-to-day basis.
I'm glad you brought up Eddie Dempsey, actually, because we've got a video of him. Most people watching would know who he is, but if you've not seen his TV performances, they've been really good. So let's have a quick look at Eddie Dempsey, the likely successor to Mick Lynch.
We don't think it's right that we've got employers making huge profits out of our industry. By the way, you don't ask any questions about that. You ask us whether we're justified in looking for pay rises. Nobody seems to worry about these companies and the profits they're taking out of our industries, at the same time as expecting workers to have pay freezes.
Because you're going to lose them if you do.
Pardon?
Don't square up against the public. These are questions from the public.
I'm not squaring up against the public, but all of these questions are about, are we justified in taking strike action?
That's obviously what they want to ask you.
Oh, well, that's the sort of thing that you want to ask, I think, in the media. I mean, you're supposed to speak truth to power. You're meant to be a noble profession, and what you do is just parrot lines from employers.
Oh, stop it.
And parrot lines from the government. And what you never do is point to the fact that we've got a government...
Do you not watch my show in the morning?
Well,
I certainly don't parrot lines from the government. I've never heard you. Thank you very much.
We've got a government right now that is bringing laws in to make it harder for workers to strike.
OK.
They're enforcing wage cuts on workers, and they're paying with taxpayers' money to cover the losses that employers incur during strike action.
OK.
We'd get to a settlement a lot quicker if they didn't do that. And we'd probably get there a lot quicker if people in the media held them to account.
OK. The government doesn't come in because they don't like the questions I ask. Thanks very much.
Now, I thought that was a perfect video which represents Dempsey, which is very similar to Lynch. Straight talking, no nonsense. He's also not afraid to go after the media. And I love the proper Cockney accent as well. I'm a union dealer. I will stop that. I have to say that me personally, I'm backing him as a replacement for Lynch. Helena, I can tell your thoughts on Eddie Dempsey.
I've just lost focus again.
I think what happens is when we switch scenes, I think the audio drops out, maybe just for you. So I'm assuming you can hear me again.
Not getting anything through.
I can hear Cog.
I can hear you now. Yeah, I've got you now.
We need to look at our systems, actually, I think, if this keeps happening. So I was going to say, I'm personally backing Eddie Dempsey to replace Lynch, and I was going to ask, look, I know your thoughts on Eddie Dempsey. I'm fairly certain you like him to be a replacement. But my question to you is, he's the assistant Gen Sec to the RMT. If he were to be leader, he's probably been holding himself back, actually, and he could be far more aggressive if he was to be the leader.
I don't think that's true, but regardless of the position that he holds, it's the rhetoric that he espouses that is important. It's position where he is putting, the class interest, the people he represents, front and centre of his political campaigning. And the thing as well is that Eddie Dempsey's kind of been through the ringer in recent years. As somebody who I disagree with regards to, say, the UK leaving the European Union, at the time he made some really salient criticisms of the broader left-wing movement had been capitulated to liberals and liberal positions on things like this. There's a very famous quote where he talked about how the kind of people who have been turned away and have kind of drifted towards the kind of Tommy Robinson-style politics in this country, they've been driven there by a kind of a calculation that's been made by people within politics to try and cobble together a majority out of course, legitimate concerns for minorities in this country, together with the aspirational end of the kind of middle and lower middle classes of this country, while leaving behind its industrial heartlands. And if they only make those calculations on who is worth trying to appeal to electorally, a bunch of people who should naturally be part of the member base of the Labour movement are going to melt away. And we've seen that happen. He was very prescient in saying so. And people got angry with him for saying, "Or why are you saying it's bad that Labour are caring about ethnic minorities?" And he never said such a thing. I don't think that's true at all about the statement that he had made there. And Eddie Dempsey was the one who's been on the ground fighting with the far right. You know, there's a very famous picture of Steve Headley from the RMT, who, with blood pouring down his face, having gotten into a bit of a scrap with people from the I think it was the EDL, and you can see Mick Lynch and Eddie Dempsey in the background doing the hard yards on the ground, defending communities from racism. So he is somebody who I have incredible respect for, and I think that he will only become an even bigger and more prominent figure in left-wing political action if he becomes the leader moving forward.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up that point. I was going to bring it up myself, which is the comment he made about liberals and how he was trying to speak to those who are becoming convinced by Tommy Robinson that liberals have essentially virtue signaled their way through politics. And I don't think it's true, but the message that these people think is that liberals put ethnic minorities over the white British working class. It's not true, but I think that's the message that these people feel. And the left has always based their political philosophy in social and economic class issues. And I felt that was what he was trying to do. Maybe slightly clumsy in his wording, but I do want to say that, you know, a while back we had Femi on the show, and they actually had a spat. I mean, I think it was even going to go to the courts. And he very much disagreed with what Eddie Dempsey said. My personal opinion, obviously, we have multiple different viewpoints at Turn Left, so not everyone has to agree with me. But my personal view is, I'm on board with what you're saying, Helena. I think he was making a salient point. Maybe he could have been a bit more clearer, that he wasn't trying to say, oh, the left cares about social issues, they need to drop it. I don't think he was saying that at all, because in fact, as you pointed out, he has been in the in the trenches, essentially, against the far right, like physically fighting these people, defending himself against these people. So that's not what he meant. But it's true that the liberals have abandoned class issues and they virtue signal on social issues, and they're not even good on social issues. And that does tell people who are leaning right, are falling down the right-wing pipeline and are becoming convinced by the likes of Reformer Tommy Robinson that the working class are not cared for. And I'm glad you brought that up. One thing I do want to ask you is, moving on from specifically Eddie Dempsey and Mick Lynch, is among the left. I mean, do we lack leaders? I think both Dempsey and Lynch are fantastic communicators, but are there enough of them? You know, I've supported the Greens for a while now. I voted for them at the election. I know you did. You're a Green member, actually. And I do see some real quality leadership from the likes of Zach Polanski, Carla Denyer. Although for a while I've wanted to see the Greens appear less technocratic and be more populist, you know, be really aggressive in their populism. I think Zach does a good job on that, but he's the deputy, not the co-leader. What do you make of that?
Oh, I 100% agree. I think we've been crying out for a real iconoclast, right? I made this point on my stream as well, in that one of the biggest things that you get, I follow Luke Trill from More in Common very closely. He does some really good work at measuring the public's opinion on loads of different issues, and I think that's a really, really interesting source to try and be able to pinpoint where the public mood is at. And one thing that comes out of a lot of More in Common's reporting on this is that in their focus groups, people feel hopeless. They feel let down by democracy. They feel like politicians are not sincere. They feel like Westminster as a system is kind of broken and that democracy doesn't function, and that's been bought out by the interests of the very, very rich. And obviously Luke is there to try and find out people's opinions on this, and I'm not going to blame him. But the politicians that interpret this data say, well, isn't it bad that people think that our democracy has been bought out by the interests of the super rich? I'm like, no. How about you consider that it has been? Like, it is, weighted in the opinions and in the needs of the very, very richest. The people think that because it's true. And what we need from on the left is politicians who look at the failure of Westminster democracy and point to it head on, who engage with public's disinterest and people's level of dissatisfaction with the failures of democracy and use that as a position to talk about things from a populist left perspective. And what the Greens' problem is they're trying to play the Westminster game. They're trying to play a parliamentary game that's 10 years out of date. They think they are wedded to this idea that the way in which you want to be politically successful is looking like other politicians, being taken seriously as serious politicians. And that may have been true in, the haircut era of David Cameron. There's no way that's true in 2025. Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, all of those kind of people who've essentially tried to get into government off of the back of both Tory failure, but cleaning house within the Labour Party, making sure the adults are back in the room. These people are hated more than anyone else. Rachel Reeves has probably the worst approval rating of any politician in the country at the moment, which obviously isn't helped by international conditions. More on that story later. But regardless, if we want to position ourselves away from these people, really have a sense that we can bring people over who are disenfranchised, because internally within polling, remember how I mentioned Reform are winning over loads of non-voters? The Greens aren't. The Greens are not, within that data, winning over people who didn't vote at the last election. Those should be our bread and butter. People who feel let down and misrepresented by our politics should be where the left wing can win. Unless we change how we approach politics and be more iconoclastic, attack from the outside rather than trying to be part of the inner ring, the more we'll be subsumed by establishment politics and have our message neutered and watered down. That was a problem that we had in 2017, where maybe there wasn't quite the ripe situation for mass movement politics to be a majority of the country, but I think we're certainly in that position now, so this tactic needs to change.
I agree, but we are going to move on because it's already 8:30. Now, can you imagine paying a company to release your own wages? That's absurd, right? But surely that's some runaway capitalist feature in a sci-fi dystopian show. Well, no. This is the reality for some gig economy workers. Retail assistants have accused a gig economy firm of holding them to ransom by making them pay a fee if they want to receive their wages within 30 days. A new payment system brought in by Young Ones, which supplies freelance retail assistants to many well-known high street stores, charges gig workers 4.8% of their earnings to be paid in 1 minute or 2.9% to be paid in 3 days. If they decline, they typically have to wait 30 days. Previously, the workers were paid in 3 days without a charge. So this is an outsourced company from retail businesses. Now, it is common practice that companies don't always deal with their own wages. There are many companies who offer those services fine, but third-party companies charging workers to receive their own wages was incredible. Now, as mentioned in the article, the system is used by Young Ones. This is the CEO, and no, the image hasn't been photoshopped. Young Ones was created in 2017 by Pim Grafmans, should I say. Now, we have some testimonies from the workers and how they've been affected by the fee. Tom Gillam, who has worked at least 6 shifts at the Emma Sleep store in Manchester, said gig workers on low and irregular wages needed money quickly to buy essentials and pay bills. People do gig work for short-term cash. It feels like we're being held to ransom, he said. It is so immoral, it's unreal. Gillam, 37, claims some of the workers at the store were last week still waiting to be paid for shifts in late November and early December. They can't really badger their managers because working as a freelancer, you have no voice. You might not get any shifts anymore if you're seen as outspoken. Another worker at the Manchester store said he was forced to borrow money from his family to buy gifts and travel home for Christmas. It is unfair for people working on a low wage with reduced rights to be charged to get their money quickly, he said. Last month, the Observer revealed the growing use of gig economy workers without basic employment rights in the retail sector, a move the TUC had called worrying. Now, this is absolutely insane dystopian stuff. Helena.
I've lost you again.
No, I've just given it a second because I know that if I speak too quickly, it's going to get cut off. So,
okay, there we go. Got you now.
We all want to know. Sorry, I'll start that again. we all know that the gig economy has been mainly about businesses watering down workers' protections and not flexible working conditions or shift patterns to benefit the workers. But did you foresee that companies would actually charge people for their own wages?
I mean, it's not something I necessarily foresaw, but it's something that shouldn't be surprising. I think is probably the best way that I put it. Am I surprised by this kind of thing? No. And there's a bunch of different things that have fed into how we're in this position in the first place. Of course, there is this free market ideology, right? The full-on free market brain neoliberal types who believe that the loosening of labour market restrictions gets to some kind of natural supply and demand situation, regardless of any negative externalities there might be in terms of who ends up at the sharp end, the bottom end of that scale. The whole point of intervention to fix the problems with the negative externalities of free market economies is specifically to protect the people at the bottom who are at the sharpest end, well, the people with the least solidified terms and conditions, the people who are on essentially the lower skilled end of the economy, people who are going to be more likely to be within the gig economy, within casualized workforces, right? So it's the libertarians' wet dream, not so much the wet dream for the people who have to be on the sharp end of all of those decisions. So that's one issue that's got us to this point. The second is a problem of outsourcing. So every single time you want to outsource a different part of your particular business, whereas it used to be, businesses would have their own HR department, they would have their own outreach, and they would do their own recruitment. All these kind of things gets outsourced again and again and again and again to all of these different people and different companies. So, for example, when I very first joined the labour market, this would have been 13 years ago now when I got my first kind of real job. This was done through a recruitment agency that was being subcontracted in an office in the larger office of the company that I was working in. So they didn't even have their own recruitment part of their own business. They actually outsourced it to somebody else who came in and set up their own office in that office. And so, of course, the more times you add a layer of bureaucracy, you add another layer of outsourcing, every single one of these people will want to gain their pound of flesh. And are they going to get their pound of flesh from the people who want to have access to their contracts? Well, no, of course they're not. They're going to get their pound of flesh from you. You sitting at home there, employers. Employers are not going to be the ones who are having their money taken away from them, because that is who they're competing for. The contracts of the employers is going to be the employees who are the ones who are going to have their money taken away from them. And again, because this is the gig economy, it's a deregulated economy at this point in terms of how we deal with our labour market. You have no regress, you have no power. The level of unionization in these sectors is incredibly low. You're completely unprotected. You're at the mercy of the employer in this incredibly one-way relationship where they have access, they have the ownership of the means of production, and you have to sell their labor to them. They are the ones who have all of the power. And of course, with that power relationship becomes the ability for exploitation. And of course, they're going to exploit you on the basics of things that you need, which is your money that you need to be able to actually live and participate in humanity. You don't have a choice, right? You don't have a choice about whether or not you go out and work for a day or work for a living because you need to put a roof over your head. So they can put barriers in front of that all they want, and you have no choice on that matter, which is incredibly dystopian. The third point I would make as well, before we move on, is that one of the key things in the New Deal for Working People that Angela Rayner was pushing for within the Labour Party in the run-up to the election. Now, she's a trade union, she's been that for a long time. One of the main things she was trying to push for was a single status of worker to try and end this fascination our employers have with the gig economy. And at the National Policy Forum meeting for the Labour Party, where the kind of finer points are drafted for what goes into the manifesto, there was this big force within the Starmer Politburo to try and remove the kind of gig economy protections that was being pushed for by the trade unions from the Labour manifesto, and they were successful in doing so. As far as I'm concerned, the fight against the casualisation of the workforce, the fight against the gig economy, this is the big workers' rights fight of our generation. So for the Labour Party to have essentially U-turned on this, to move away and abandon this kind of existential fight for the rights of the working class in this country is nothing short of ideological treason. So they may have done some good things on people with proper contracts in terms of things like sick pay, and I would applaud them for doing so and increasing the minimum wage. Stepping down for protections for even more casualised and even more vulnerable workers, that is something that we shouldn't be standing for when it comes to Labour Party politics.
I mean, the gig economy makes it far more difficult for workers' solidarity and collective bargaining because, workers are deliberately atomized. I mean, back in the early 1900s, when workers' movements were building power, they were largely from factories and places where workers communicated and were in each other's presence. That's not so much the case anymore for many sectors, including retail. So, I mean, the question I have is, how can workers combat this? And how can we build solidarity and collective action when dealing with this kind of atomized individualist economy?
I mean, we have to be using media first and foremost to be... I'll start that again, sorry. We have to be using media first and foremost, both old and new media and social media, to be trying to put forward the case for large-scale unionization in this country. We cannot let the hustle culture economics of the Patrick Bet-Davids and the Gary Vaynerchuks of this world to capture an entire new generation of people into thinking that we should be accepting this dog-eat-dog, hyper-competitive, hyper-individualized and hyper-atomized economy that's been created by neoliberalism. We cannot let them be the only force that's marketing towards these people. We have to use every avenue that we can to put forward to people that the only way you can protect your rights is collectively. Now, of course, legislation will help. Having people who want to legislate to be able to protect these people is important. So having elected representatives from independents to Green Party people, or whatever kind of new leftist movement might arise in the future, like, these are all good things. We should be doing that. But we cannot rely just on politicians to do it. We have to reach out to people and get them in the position where they see unionization as fundamental to a collective fight against the employers doing whatever the hell they want with workers' rights in this country. And this is going back to our previous point, where people like Eddie Dempsey and Mick Lynch and other trade union representatives like Sharon Graham and Dave Ward are going to be key for that messaging, because people will respect people who put these points to them having got the experience. People look at people like Gary Vee and Patrick Bet-David and say, well, these people are successful themselves. I should try and emulate them. Well, Mick Lynch was successful in getting a good deal for his workers. Eddie Dempsey has been part of that as well, and so have Sharon Graham and Dave Ward. If we look at all of the wins that Unite the Union have had recently, so many wins, including getting people who were previously outsourced by the NHS insourced as part of their trade union negotiation, as part of the dispute over wages, bringing people back in-house. I was under a Conservative government as well. We need these people not just speaking to their own members, but as part of our recruitment drive for people to join the trade union movement as well. This is going to involve outreach, it's going to involve smart media, and it's going to involve smart messaging. This is something the left has failed on. As I said, trade union membership, record lows in this country, because I'm assuming there are probably lots of young people, when the unionization rate for under 25s is 9%, probably don't even have any idea what a trade union even is. And this is why we need to get the message out now. There's no time to wait.
I couldn't agree more. And the two main points on that is unions and media. It's good that we've here at Turn Left, we're big supporters of unions, our new left-wing outlet. So it's almost like we need a media for socialism. Thought I'd just plug ourselves out on our own show. Now, before we go on to our next story, I just want to say thank you to all those who are watching. Remember, if you haven't liked the stream already, then please do. And if you're not subscribed, then make sure you do that too. If you come back after live and drop a comment, that helps the algorithm too. Now, if you want to see Turn Left continue to grow and you want to see workers' power growing, then make sure you share this video online, tell your friends and family about us. And again, if you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Now, there are currently only a handful of us working voluntarily, and we want to be in a position where we are paid for our work. One day, this becoming our full-time jobs. This means we can upgrade our equipment, get better streaming software so mics don't cut out, create more ambitious content, and one day have a studio. So let's build a socialist media alternative. Thank you. You can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to donate. And you can also follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is at turnleftmedia.co.uk. Let's bring up some comments. Very interested to see what you have to say tonight. Let's have a look. Mr. Producer, are you there? I think he's very... here we go. Stanley Beckett. Richard Madeley seems to have a limited understanding of Marxism. Well, I mean, I was thinking that earlier, actually, because I was thinking, I am a Marxist, and yes, we need a political revolution of some kind, but I don't think these two are for me, not linked anyway. I mean, Marxism is an analysis of an economy. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go up and take into battle for a revolution. But it was classic real life Alan Partridge. Let's go to another one. Flo Snake, yes, dudes, please stop, Curtis. Your London accent is even worse than mine. What do you mean? What do you mean, mate? What do you fucking mean? Right, okay. That's the last time I'm going to do it. It's clearly terrible. I mean, I even look at your face, you're cringing there. Let's go to another one. Jim Speak, breaking Keir Starmer announces ruthless cuts to Curtis's mic. I fucking knew it was him, clearly. Because we're going to talk about Rachel Reeves in a second, actually. And I guess I forgot to mention that she's coming after Turn Left's mics. Satnav, Eddie leads from the front lines. He certainly does. And part of the reason why I think he would be a great leader is because he's strong like Mick Lynch. It just goes to show that leaders don't need to capitulate to be smart and stuff. No, they just say what they feel, and they don't give a shit. It's brilliant. Jacqueline, when Stephen Yaxley Lennon is talking about the working class, he's only referring to the white section of the working class and not the working class in all its diversity. Yes and no. I mean, my opinion anyway. Yes, he's only speaking to the white working class, but he's not speaking on behalf of them because he doesn't care about the white working class either. He is someone who's a tool for capital. He would much rather support the billionaire class and the very richest in society than the working class.
I mean, that's why I want to come in on this, actually, because I think that one of the things that got people misunderstanding what Eddie Dempsey was trying to say in the clip that we're referencing here is that if you can imagine people only applying a social policy analysis to something like the Liberals will do, and I don't think they're necessarily wrong. I don't think they're wrong to talk about the social issues that affect people from minority communities. If that only overlaps with people within Labour Party politics that then that's then approaching economic issues from a middle class perspective, what that does, whilst it is important to recognise minority issues on social policy, it's meaning that people specifically from the white working class demographic are seeing no social policy in their direction and no economic policy in their direction, and that's why they feel left out. It's not because people are going after white working class people, which is what Tommy Robinson is trying to get these people to feel like. It's the natural result of a social policy and economic policy framework that doesn't intersect across those lines specifically. And that's why people, I think, like Femi, looked at it and thought, well, Eddie Dempsey is saying we should be interested in this white working class people as a racial and class group. And I was like, although they're just left out because we don't talk about working class issues. You can quite easily say, well, our economic point of view should be based on working class lines, and our social policy lines should be based on minority interests, for example, and then working class white people are not left out because their economic class issues are fully represented. Maybe a bunch of middle class white people will feel left out, but quite frankly, I couldn't give a shit if a bunch of middle class people are left out of economic analysis, which is based fundamentally on working class principles.
Well, I also find it interesting that Mick Lynch, right? I mean, he was asked about immigration, and he wasn't reactionary on immigration. He was like, no, I stand up for migrant rights as well. So he can communicate on these issues without capitulating, but front and center, because he's a union leader, it's about class. What I do find also very interesting is you get this from Blairites. They'll say, well, the left forget about the white working class. They happily lean into that rhetoric, but their answer isn't class-based politics or class-based policies. They'll say, we're ignoring the white working class, therefore that's why we need to clamp down on immigration. So it's like, okay, I mean, I have no issue someone saying, let's talk about the white working class, as long as you make sure that you say the policies are for everyone, regardless of race or religion. The working class is working class, it's diverse. But if they're going to come at that angle and say, yeah, so we're going to agree with the far right, on the right, it's all about immigration, then you're going to further disillusion these people.
And again, like, they try and claim, well, if you don't care about immigration, then you don't care about white working class people's interests. That's a very kind of classist point of view, as if, A, all white working class people fundamentally think that immigration is the most important metric. I do think there's a broad consensus across not just working but middle class people from all backgrounds that immigration is too high. I disagree, but you can't just ignore that that's a political position that's widely held. But to try and claim that that is the sole political position that you would lose an entire demographic over, I think that's classist. When, of course, Akala pointed out in his debate, quote unquote, with Tommy Robinson all those years ago, trying to claim that this kind of dislike of immigration is fundamentally an issue of the working classes themselves. That's total nonsense. Like, that is complete nonsense. There are plenty of strata all across society that are anti-immigration, and the fundamental racism of our society comes from the top down. It comes from elite academics passed down through political policy, through the media. This isn't something that is unique to working class people, and I think that any Blairite who says that is essentially trying to mask the fact that their economic policy doesn't appeal to white working class people at all, because it's not based in working class principles. It's based in liberal, middle class, quote unquote, aspirational principles. Not that there's anything wrong with wanting to aspire. I don't think there's anything wrong with aspiration at all. But I aspire to have a rising tide that lifts all of the boats, rather than allowing some boats to rescue themselves from the wreckage whilst the other ones sink. Like, I'm sorry, if you're a social democrat at the very least, which is the kind of the most like right wing left position, if you see what I mean, right? Rather than being a socialist, you're just a basic social democrat. You should fundamentally believe in raising the floor before you start thinking about raising the ceiling.
Precisely. I mean, my aspiration is the emancipation of the working class, because I think if we all do better, that's the good of everyone. It's a very simple concept. We will move on to another question. Flow Snake, yet another use of enforced self-employment to screw workers over. Yeah, it's what they used against Uber drivers and stuff. And the thing is, the way they frame it is self-employed sounds enticing, you know. Oh, I'm my own boss. I have to work for anyone. But it's, of course, it's a lot of crap. It's a lot of crap. It's just a way to water down workers' rights. Mithril, a lot of taxi, not just Uber drivers, are in a terrible position. If you're not an owner driver, you get told when you work, you get expected to make up time if you're ill or the car has broken down. It's just a way of offloading the costs onto the worker. We'll reference them as workers because that's what they are. And it's kind of like, we're going to pay you really, really shit, but also you have to maintain everything yourself. It is truly dystopian, and you know, the charging of the wages to receive your own wages is just the continuation of this dystopian gig economy. Katie Marshall, how is this legal? Gov need to fix that immediately. If they don't, unions might need to put the pressure on. I know the TEC have in a statement, and I mean, this is something that can easily be fixed by the government. Will they do it? Who knows? I think it's very low-hanging fruit for the government to do as well. They can simply just outlaw it. I think that's the last comment. It is? Okay, let's move on to our last story of the evening. Rachel Reeves finds herself in a difficult situation. The economy is not doing well, with interest payments on borrowing hitting a 30-year high. The cost of borrowing soared to its highest level for more than a quarter of a century this week as gilt yields continue to rise. 30 months after the budget, the yield on 30-year gilts reached more than 5.25% on Tuesday for the first time since 1998, and today have ticked over 5.34%. Meanwhile, the yield on a 10-year gilt is up to 4.8%, thus the highest level since the financial crisis. The yield, which measures how much it costs the government to borrow, is now higher than after Liz Truss's mini-budget, sparking fears it could push up the cost of borrowing for households and businesses too. Now, this has meant that Reeves is scrambling to raise funds, which she was left with a choice between cuts or tax rises. And the reason why she was left with this choice is because of a stupid fiscal rules. She can't raise taxes due to the promise that she said she wouldn't do that before the election. And given how the inheritance tax went down, she's not going to do that. So instead, she's decided to cut disability benefits. It is understood that Labour is planning significant cuts to disability benefits managed by the DWP as part of their strategy to alleviate market worries about their economic policies. High-ranking individuals with Downing Street and the Treasury are of the belief that substantial reductions to the DWP budget are required, with PIP identified as a primary target for reform. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has directed civil servants to adopt a tough stance on spending, preferred departmental cuts over new tax hikes. Now, I just want to say that mainstream articles are framing this in a way that she has to make budget cuts to alleviate market worries. Of course, that framing is a load of bullshit. Currently, personal independent payment can provide up to £9,600 per year to assist those with disabilities and health conditions with additional expenses. However, there's been a notable rise in mental health related claims, with new monthly payments for anxiety or depressive disorders more than doubling from £2,200 in 2019 to £5,300 in 2023. Officials are now considering tighter restrictions on disability payment qualifications, particularly focusing on defining eligible mental health conditions more precisely and potentially requiring stronger medical evidence before approving claims. Now, the left predicted this. I mean, had Labour campaigned on raising taxes on the wealthy or a wealth tax, then they could have implemented those policies without losing political capital, since that was the promise before the election. And she can't increase spending without tax rises or cuts because she made, once again, her fiscal rules. This political failure has been entirely their own making. Tax increases certainly would have had the most negative impact in terms of their credibility. But cutting benefits is deeply immoral, although, I don't know, Labour hardly cares. Helena, in this situation, could have Reeves dropped her fiscal rules? Obviously, that would damage her credibility, but isn't that the best option, given that she wasn't going to raise taxes and protect those on welfare with further cuts?
I think that the issue that she has is that if she'd never had the fiscal rules to begin with, all of her options would be open right here.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any need to look into spending cuts or tax rises. Not that I think the tax rises would be a bad thing. I think we need more taxes on the rich. But even if you just assume that it's politically impossible for Rachel Reeves to do tax cuts, to do tax rises or spending cuts, if you think that it's politically impossible for her to do both of those things, therefore she needs other options at her disposal, that's a reasonable position. That's the position I think at this point we are basically at, that no one would really accept any more tax rises after a bunch of tax rises in the last budget. So what I think the problem she has is that she could break the fiscal rule. She could change the fiscal rule right now. But if in response to market panic, she just goes, oh, well, I'm just going to change the rules, the markets would certainly view that as something that would give them less trust, make them less sure of their investment in the UK economy. And that would only push gilt yields up further and therefore do further damage to our overall credibility, right? Market panic in response to somebody saying, oh, I'm just going to change the rules then. Whereas if she'd never had the rules in the first place, it wouldn't be a problem because she would just change her overall spending envelope and it wouldn't lead to a potential U-turn that would damage her credibility in the eyes of market people or those who are potentially out there trying to sell off gilts, right? The reason for the spike in the gilt yield is because there's been a sell-off. People are trying to sell these particular products. What happens when people are trying to sell a thing? The value of it goes down, therefore the interest payment on it needs to go up to satisfy investors that it's a good place to put their money if they think the value might go down over time. And that can lead, if things continue to sell off, to a kind of doom spiral that you see where the value of a currency goes low because people are trying to off-sell on the assumption that the price will be lower in future, therefore it's going to not be a safe investment for them. Now, of course, there are plenty of things that we could cut that's not disability benefit too. We could be cutting things like Trident or military spending, for example. We could do these things. Even if you wanted to do cuts, I don't think that we should. But we could do these cuts, and she's still not doing that. After Keir Starmer said we should be balancing the budget on the backs of the people with the broadest shoulders, I don't think disability is something that necessarily falls within that category. So this is just total abandonment of Labour's political principles. But she said that she wanted to be tougher than the Tories on benefits in 2014, and she is doubling down on those promises that she made all of those years ago. And this is especially galling since we now know from a report in The Guardian that these changes to disability payment that were being drafted by the Conservatives off of the advice of Ian Duncan Smith's think tank, the Centre for Social Justice, very ironically named, we now know from those leaks that there was never any intention that this was something that would be good for disabled people. It was all just being done for fiscal reasons. So there is zero justification for these cuts. And even if, after all of this, you didn't want to change the fiscal rules, you didn't want to do tax cuts, and you didn't want to do spending increases, or you didn't want to do... let me start that again. Even after all of this, even if you accepted that the fiscal rules shouldn't change and that we shouldn't be doing tax rises and that we shouldn't be doing spending cuts, there are still options on the table as well. So one of the reasons why we're seeing a sell-off of bonds in the country is because the Bank of England is engaging in quantitative tightening. They are currently selling bonds at the same time, therefore increasing the supply, reducing the cost, and therefore increasing the yield. Like Rachel Reeves tomorrow could go to the Bank of England and say, "Oi, Andrew Bailey, stop selling off bonds. Stop quantitative tightening right now," and he'd have to do it. The Bank of England Act specifically says that the Chancellor, if she thinks it's in the interest of the broader economy, can overrule the decisions of the Independent Bank of England. She could do that tomorrow. Just tell them to stop selling gilts. And though this overall sell-off that's increasing the yield might stop, would be more likely to stop. And she's not doing it because she's fundamentally wedded to the Treasury brain that's plagued our economic decision-making for the last 45 years. And yet she won't do that. She could tier the interest payments that we pay on reserves held by the Bank of England from their quantitative easing program, and she won't do that either, even though the European Central Bank already does this. There's plenty of precedent for this not being some kind of measure that would bring down an economy, because it was fine when the ECB did it, yet Rachel Reeves won't do that either. So there's loads of options that she could be taking in terms of spending cuts elsewhere, tax rises, breaking the fiscal rules, or other kind of economic stuff in the background with regards to the Bank of England that she could be using as a way of mitigating these problems in the markets, other than going after the disabled. And she's choosing none of them and is breaking this very small promise that Keir Starmer made to balance the books off the back of the people with the broadest shoulders. And that is unforgivable.
I mean, it's remarkable how those like Rachel Reeves, who say they're the grown-ups in the room, they're the ones that understand what it's like to be in power, what it's like to be in government, don't understand that the problem with Liz Truss's budget was it's not the policy itself, it's the fact that it spooked the markets. And the markets are really, the thing they care about the most is stability. I mean, that's why John McDonnell went to the City of London and said, look, we are going to increase taxation, but this is how this is our economic plan. We're going to use it to invest in the economy. And the markets wouldn't have spooked so much because he told them exactly what they were going to do. Now, when you go into an election saying we're committed to not increasing taxation, as you said, you're closing yourself off because you never know what's around the corner. Now, of course, for us, increasing taxation is more about reducing inequality. But even if you don't have that belief, or that sort of MMT belief, shall we say, keep your options open, because it's far better to say, look, there's a possibility of tax rises than saying there's going to be no tax rises, and then that might be an option. In fact, it's better to go into go into an election saying we're committed to tax rises on the wealthy, and then not do it, rather than saying we're probably not going to do it, and that's on the table. Betting markets now are actually apparently talking about Reeves being ousted. I mean, do you think that's a possibility? And if so, who do you think would be the likely successor? And if Keir Starmer was to do this, do you think that this is actually a good political move in a situation where they've, of course, painted themselves into a corner?
So I think it's first of all worth pointing out that with regards to Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, it was entirely self-inflicted. So the reason why that there was a problem for the economy was that the yields on gilt spiked overnight as a reaction to the budget, and a bunch of pension funds were over-leveraged in government bonds, so they got margin called, which almost led to a massive collapse in people's pension savings, which was then mitigated by a bond buying program from the Bank of England. So the comparisons between Liz Truss and Rachel Reeves, I think, are unfair, in that one of the biggest things driving up bond yields in the UK right now is just America. Like, they broadly track with US Treasury yields, and there's not much that Rachel Reeves can do about that other than engage, I guess, to ask Andrew Bailey to reverse quantitative tightening. So there's a lot of these problems with regards to the picture of the markets that is out of Rachel Reeves' hands, which isn't true in the same way as Liz Truss, regardless. So I think she's a little bit hard done by in terms of being blamed for the initial problem. What we should be blaming her for is how she reacts to that problem, right? In the same way that you can't blame the Conservatives for inflation happening when they were in government, because that was an international problem, but you can blame them for how they responded to it, which was, again, trying to stop us getting wage rises and advising the Bank of England to deal with problems in terms of too many wage rises, for example. So, and obviously their failure on energy policy that led to us be overexposed to a gas crisis happening because of the war in Ukraine as well. So that's the problem, is we're critiquing her for her reaction, not the fact that this has happened. That's really important to pin down on this. With regards to her potentially stepping down, now, her approval ratings are really bad. She has some of the lowest approval of any politician in government at the moment. Does that mean she'll step down? Well, when was the last time that replacing a chancellor calmed markets? This isn't something that you can be able to look at in terms of how it affects the economy. And I think most Labour politicians are of the opinion that getting people to think that their living standards are going up is more important than whether or not they like the individual politicians. And I think there's merit to that. Like Kamala Harris's approval ratings went up when she got nominated to be the presidential candidate in America, but fundamentally how popular she was or wasn't was never going to be as important to Americans as their material conditions, right? And that was the big thing that came out of the post-election polling. People cared about the economy. There was inflation when they were in government, and they got blamed for it. That's the thing, right? So they're looking at living standards as being the important part of their message moving forward. So I don't think we'll see Rachel Reeves get replaced. If she does, I think that it probably will be by Pat McFadden, which is the worst decision possible, because that man he's not only a charisma vacuum. I also think that he's well known to be somebody who's pretty high up in the Summer Politburo, so that won't be a change of direction in terms of policy whatsoever. Although Number 10 did put out a statement saying that Rachel Reeves will be Chancellor until the next election. I don't think that's wise, because I think that somebody, maybe 2 years down the line, you try and get a fresh face in so that they can't be blamed on any economic problems that happen over the next year, if that's true. So maybe that there is warranted for a change, but this quickly will do nothing to calm the markets and will probably make it look even worse. They'll think we're totally unstable if we're replacing people left, right, and centre. People do want stability, so Rachel Reeves probably will remain in post for now.
Yeah, I suppose it's not a trade-off between political capital and the state of the economy, because if you were to get rid of a chancellor within months, the economy would suffer for it because of the uncertainty. So I guess it's a fair comment. You're right. The best thing to do is probably to stick with her. I also agree with you. It is unfair to make the comparison between Liz Truss and Rachel Reeves. Don't think it's her fault, but of course it's the reaction to it. Now, I was reading Richard Murphy's tax research website. I really like some of the stuff he's been saying. His view is that the government doesn't need gilts. I mean, he says basically it's a myth that we use them for borrowing. Of course, we know his macro policy is quantitative easing, and he is one of the biggest proponents of MMT. Also, a while back, I was listening to Unlearning Economics, and he does great work too. I think he was talking about UBI specifically, but he said that high spending isn't inflationary. So I want to get your comment on what Richard Murphy has been saying, but also where did this idea that the policies of high amounts of investment or high spending increases inflation? Because obviously this is in line with Rachel Reeves and most mainstream political parties adopt, hence why Rachel Reeves has the fiscal rules.
I mean, I think that one of the big things that MMT theorists will adhere to is that the fundamental purpose of government spending is to mobilize real resources in the economy. This is the fundamental fulcrum on which all economic policy should reside, is what real resources do you have at your disposal, and how can you use the fact that you are a sovereign currency issuer to mobilize those to maximize the economic output at that point. So that's when inflation happens, is where you put new money into the economy at full capacity. Is everyone being productive? Are all potential physical resources being mobilized through engaging in targeted investment? Like, that's what's important as far as I'm concerned about MMT, alongside replacing this idea that taxes fund government spending with government funds spending through the Bank of England through currency creation, and that currency is just taxed back and destroyed as a method of controlling the money supply to be able to ensure that we don't get demand-driven inflation by getting to the point where the max amount of resources have been maximized. Now, I think this is a really good story about how the economy works, and I think it's fundamentally true, but it shouldn't really change your approach to policy, in the whether or not you're funding it through gilts or you're funding it through money creation or whatever it might be, your increase in government spending has to be used to mobilize resources. That's the fundamental part that I think is important about MMT as a theory, is looking at the real resources that you have, which is why fundamentally I think the fiscal rule that's being broken here is so stupid in the first place. The idea that from a mainstream Keynesian would be you can't deficit spend on day-to-day spending because that's not investment. Well, I mean, increased, provision in the NHS by having NHS doctors and nurses paid high enough that you can bring in more staff to see more patients, which would bring the waiting lists down. that's a productivity increase. That will lead to more people being seen by the NHS and be able to getting back into work full time, which will increase productivity and mobilise real resources. This is classified as day-to-day spending by the government. And if we don't do that, we'll see an economic doom spiral. One of the biggest problems in our economy is the lack of people able to get out there and be productive because they're sitting on an NHS waiting list. But Rachel Reeves' own fiscal rules preclude her from deficit spending on things outside of physical investment in new infrastructure in the NHS, despite the fact that whilst that is necessary, other spending is also necessary to see people. So that would be a pro-growth measure that is precluded by her silly fiscal rules. And that is where the mobilisation of resources as the fulcrum of how you do policy is important to me.
I mean, I suppose what Richard Murphy was saying, though, is that we don't need gilts because we can just fund everything. We don't need an income for it. So we don't need to borrow, essentially. That's,
yeah.
I mean, yeah. But at the same time, I guess it doesn't really matter, though, because you're quite right that if you adhere to the MMT mindset, you don't really even need to change the policy. It is more of a story or narrative there. So even if you're borrowing through gilts, okay, there's interest you've got to pay back. But if you're someone who believes in the MMT theory, and I'm not saying as if I don't believe it, but I'm just, it is an economic theory, then it kind of doesn't matter if you're paying interest on it because you can fund things anyway because we have a sovereign currency. I mean, I hope I'm not butchering his sort of argument there. I don't know if I've broadly got that right.
I think the difference between the two really is that if you're getting people repaying bond values, then that doesn't increase the money supply as quickly as printing new money, engaging in money creation would do directly. And whilst that may be absolutely fine and would have been fine in the 0% interest rates liquidity trap that the country was in from 2010 to 2020, perfectly a reasonable way of doing it. I think Richard Murphy was right to lobby John McDonnell to engage in what was called the people's quantitative easing, which is essentially money creation as a way of creating an investment bank and a way of investing in new businesses when the economy was essentially stagnant during the entirety of that period, where there wasn't enough investment in productive capital, in productive use of investment to create new businesses, to create new economic activity at that time. Because people just taking new money from George Osborne's quantitative easing plan and throwing it into assets, just pouring liquidity into the property markets, into financial instruments, made wealthy people way more wealthy, increased growth because the value of assets was growing. Did that make things better for normal people? Well, no, it made it worse. The normal people aren't homeowners, they don't hold financial assets. Their assets were getting much less valuable in relation to the financial and property assets held by the super rich. So everybody was overall poorer in this country as a result, whereas productive investment would have been pro-growth, would have not been inflationary as the supply of goods and services would have been increasing in the economy due to that productive investment, and we would have seen a fairer economy. Now we're seeing the kind of inflation being kind of sticky, which is the point where under MMT theory, you stop the spending is when we see lots of inflation. That's where you want to rein in your government spending. And also, we're not just seeing levels of inflation, but we're also seeing a depreciation of the currency. If you then start printing more currency and you don't have a way of getting people to produce things that make people want to have your access to your currency to be able to buy your exported products, that can have a downward pressure on the currency and could see a shorting of the pound if you gauge it too much, like expansionary spending through money printing. That's where I would think there would be a problem if there's too much inflation, which might make inflation, or if you see the value of the pound decrease too much. Again, this could be in somewhat mitigated by having a better manufacturing sector, and that will require more investment. But it's a full problem that the UK economy has of being over-financialised, in that we don't make anything, we were deindustrialised, people only want pounds to engage in our financial sector, so we have to essentially live off of this kind of three financiers in a trench coat economy within the city of London that then finances everybody else. And so if you had more regional equality, more manufacturing, I think that would be a more credible policy moving forward.
I agree, certainly about manufacturing and becoming a 90% service economy, I think is a problem. Richard Murphy, I find him very interesting. I think people should go check him out. He's got some very interesting theories. Definitely check out Unlearning Economics. I've learned a lot from him. So brilliant stuff. But I will say that is all we have time for. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. And of course, I want to thank Helena. She's now going to be going live on her channel. But don't worry. Yes. We got you covered, because if you stay right here, we're going to magically transport you over to her live stream. Remember, if you haven't liked the stream already, then please do. And if not subscribed, then make sure you do that too. Again, come back tomorrow, whatever, drop a comment. This will help the algorithm. And of course, if you want to see Turn Left continue to grow, then make sure you share this video online, tell your friends and family about us. Again, currently, there's only a few of us working voluntarily, and we want to be in a position where we do this full-time and we're paid for it. You can help us by doing that by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to donate. It could be a monthly subscription via Patreon or a one-off donation for, I think it's Buy Me a Coffee website. We're also on Blue Sky at turnleftmedia.co.uk. We're also now live on Twitch and Kick. So if anyone you know, or if it's yourself that uses those platforms, then you can watch us there too. We are back this Thursday at the same time of 8 p.m. I'm Curtis Daly. Thank you, and see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.